This is a CNN special report. America's New War. Tonight, the investigation. Did the FBI have two of the hijackers in its sights before the attack? A plan for the future. President Bush readies the nation for war.
We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring them to justice.
And a man on a mission. A mission to find his daughter and bring her home alive.
I don't have any video of her. To be honest with you, Melissa didn't like to be videoed. She used to holler at me every time I did. I'd give anything to ever holler at her now.
This is a CNN special report. America's New War. From New York, here's Aaron Brown.
Good evening again. The sirens in the background Saturday night in New York City. The lights of the rescue site behind us, not exactly where we expected to be, not at all. But then almost nothing about this week is as expected. Certainly the men and women at Ground Zero didn't expect to be dredging through tons of wreckage and debris, searching for 5,000 missing people. The New York Fire Department didn't expect to be mourning the death of their chaplain and a number of their chiefs. And thousands of families didn't expect to be heartbroken because a son or a daughter, a spouse, a father never came home from work on Tuesday. All of it is unexpected, and every bit of it is sad. In the next 2 hours, a review of the day that has been and a look at what lies ahead on a day when the president proclaimed it is war, a war with an invisible enemy. First, we want to update you on what has gone on today. Here are the latest headlines to date. The Pentagon has activated 35,000 reservists under a military operation it has just declared Operation Noble Eagle, a name you'll hear a lot in the days ahead. These troops will help with what the president calls homeland defenses, making this country safe. And in New York today, a second arrest warrant has been issued. This for a material witness in the terrorist attacks. Federal prosecutors say this witness is not in custody and has not yet been identified publicly. The president formally warned the American public today, quote, "We are at war." And he said the United States was fighting a new kind of enemy, a hidden foe on a worldwide but undefined battlefield. The president also called on America's fighting men and women to get ready. And in Lower Manhattan, of course, the search for survivors goes on as it has been going on since Tuesday. So far, more than 150 bodies have been recovered, and the number of missing climbs towards 5,000. Fire and rescue officials, it was a day to honor fallen comrades.
Patriots from distant ages, seen so longing for their end. Prophets of seers and sages, all await a glory.
This was the massive Christian burial for Fire Department Chaplain Michael Judge, Fire Chief Peter Gansey, and First Deputy Fire Commissioner William Feehan were also buried today. Those are the headlines at the top of the hour. As you look at this satellite image of Lower Manhattan, this is the area right in the center of your screen. You can see that plume of smoke where the World Trade Center towers once stood. You see more clearly, perhaps, or the breadth of the damage. Consider this as a satellite photo, how large that area of destruction is and how clear the plume of smoke is. Just a few blocks away, 40 or 50 blocks away from where we are. Quite a stunning scene. Among the most disquieting bits of news today were signs that the FBI had the names of two of the people who were involved, or at least appear to have been involved in the hijacking, and that they may have been tied to another terrorist attack and to one of the world's most prominent terrorists. One of our national correspondents, CNN's Eileen O'Connor, is part of the team that has been working on the investigative side of the story. And Eileen joins us now. Good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. Well, as you said, very disturbing and has just increased the sense of urgency this investigation has. Investigators seek accomplices and associates of the hijackers, people they believe perhaps are also people who may have been trying to hijack other planes and were thwarted in their attempt or were helping the hijackers. This is like an enormous puzzle, investigators are telling me. Actually, more like 3 or 4 puzzles all jumbled together. They have people all over the world, Aaron, finding pieces, trying to fit them together. And they're also digging back into puzzles they thought they'd already solved, finding pieces they missed. What's really disturbing now, exhausted as they are, is that these pieces didn't fit together earlier in time to prevent these tragedies. They booked the tickets on American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to Los Angeles on Travelocity, using a New Jersey address, mailboxes, etc. And names U.S. officials confirm were known to them: Khalid al-Mihdhar and Salim al-Hamzi. Once on board, together with al-Hamzi's brother and an old roommate, a known pilot, they took over the flight, crashing it into the Pentagon. Within minutes, the facade of a symbol of American strength crumbled. As the search and rescue efforts continue, sources say the FBI was informed that Khalid al-Mihdhar and Salim al-Hamzi were associated with Osama bin Laden and the bombing of the USS Cole. One source confirms al-Mihdhar was seen on surveillance tape in Malaysia, meeting with the suspect in that bombing.
One was kind of short and the other two was tall.
Al-Mihdhar was a frequent visitor of al-Hamzi and his brother Nawak in the San Diego apartment complex.
It was always together. If they left, it was together. They come back, they're together.
They hung out a lot at the pool, despite telling their neighbors they were studying at a nearby college.
You'll see 3 of them in the pool swimming, or you'll see the dude always looking out the window, another one outside the door on the phone.
At one point, they left, telling one landlord they were in Arizona, living in different cities at different addresses. As it turns out, rooming with another hijacker aboard that plane, Hani Hanjour. Hani attended this flying school, CRM, Cockpit Resource Management, but left without a certification.
He's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Not a promising student, but skilled enough to carry out the mission. And what is really frustrating and confusing to these investigators, slowing down their job, Aaron, is the fact that many of these men may have used aliases, may have used the same names, and also used very similar names. So it's really confusing things, because as you come up with computer records, you're not really sure. They might have the same names, but are these really the same men? Aaron?
Well, that's the problem in part. I mean, here they have these names, presumably, perhaps they're the same people. Are they, in Washington, investigators second-guessing intelligence sources and their effectiveness here? Or is that just hindsight?
Well, what they are doing is going back over everything, and we're talking about incidences all the way back into the 1980s. I mean, this is a tragedy of such huge proportions that nobody wants to really be pointing fingers at each other. It's just too serious. But certainly there is a sense of frustration that perhaps there were some pieces that were missed before. Perhaps they had one piece and another piece was over there, and they just didn't get it together in time. Aaron?
And how long were these guys living in San Diego?
They were living there, in fact, on and off for several years, and at some point, as I said, they lived in Arizona. And tonight, in fact, I've just confirmed with sources that a man who may have been, may be the brother of the al-Hamzis looks to be, he is in custody. I've confirmed this tonight on an INS violations. Police are looking at him, but again, he may be the brother. Again, it could be a case of mistaken identity. So they are, though, seeking accomplices of these men. They know that there are still people on the ground, Aaron, who had to have helped them in this hijacking and in all of these tragedies, putting these planes into these buildings. Aaron.
And just going back to where you began, Eileen, this putting together these pieces of the puzzle, more and more it looks like when you get all of the pieces together, you get the face of Osama bin Laden.
You do, and also you get the very broad face of his support. And that is what is very scary to investigators. I mean, what's happening here, Aaron, is you're seeing links to groups in Pakistan, Algeria. I've picked up a name today that could be a Chechen name. We're also seeing links back to Lebanese, the bombing of the Beirut embassy in the early 80s, and that's a Lebanese connection. So all of these connections are very disturbing because it shows that these groups have somehow come together and united, and that is certainly a very daunting opponent. Aaron?
It is indeed. Eileen, thank you. Thank you for your work today. All of this is a good thing to keep in mind, how broad this all is as we go along in the broadcast tonight and start to talk about the military options, the possibilities. It's not just simply hitting a village somewhere. You've got people spread out over a wide area. Also spread out over a wide area is the federal investigation, not just of the people who may have been directly involved in the hijackings and the tragedy on Tuesday, but those people who may have offered them assistance and safe haven. Mike Betcher in Atlanta has been working on that part of the story, and Mike joins us now. Mike, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. Well, they've issued a federal warrant for one man they want as a material witness, but he is not in custody. And a Justice Department spokesman, Mindy Tucker, said and indicated this is just the beginning. You're going to see a lot more of this, more people arrested and warrants issued as material witnesses in this crime. There is one man already arrested as a material witness. He was detained on Thursday when he was taken off a flight. He had a fake pilot's identification. He was actually charged on Friday as a material witness. And also there are 25 other people in detention by the INS, and the FBI is speaking to them. Some, we are told, are cooperating, so we should see a lot more actual arrests made coming very soon. Now, the FBI is also trying to learn as much as they can about the 19 known hijackers aboard those 4 aircraft, and they have developed a list of characteristics. Now, it's a common trait of characteristics, and if we can put that up, here are a few of them. The list is actually quite long and has a lot of different characteristics, but we've seen the FBI list, and of course there's the obvious. All of them are male, most in their early 20s, likely to have Saudi passports, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, clean-shaven, and Western appearance. But what we also have is the training manual of Al-Qaeda, the bin Laden organization. So if indeed this was a bin Laden operation, they would have followed this training manual. So let's take a look at these characteristics and go to the training manual and compare them. Now, if you look at the characteristics where they talk about likely to have Saudi passports and likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, in the manual it says, the bin Laden manual, it says all documents of the undercover brother, such as identity card and passport, should be falsified. Now, in that list given by the FBI, they said most had Saudi passports, but judging by that, it's no guarantee that they actually are Saudi Arabian citizens or those are actually valid passports. Let's go back to the list. Let's look at the last one, clean-shaven, Western appearance. Okay, let's go to the bin Laden manual and see what they say about that. The photograph of the brother in these documents should be without a beard. So they're saying in the documents, let's say, for example, a false passport or a driver's license, they should be clean-shaven so they do not bring attention to themselves as perhaps being Muslim. And there is one other common characteristic, but it has nothing to do with personal characteristics. It has to do with targets. Let's go back to the bin Laden manual. And in that, there is a final you can see it on the bottom. It's number 7. It's hard to read. Here we go. It's coming up. This is in terms of picking targets. And this will send some chills up if you read this. Blasting and destroying the embassies and attacking vital economic centers. If this was indeed Al-Qaeda, they sure did follow that last part of the bin Laden training manual. Aaron?
Well, I agree. That's pretty chilling stuff. Just give me a sense, Michael, if today the investigation took small steps forward or a large step? Is there any sense that they moved as rapidly as they seemed to the previous days?
I think they're making large steps forward right now in terms of finding the people who they want to question, who may have more knowledge about this. I think that's the code that's being thrown out right now, Aaron, about these 25 in detention on immigration charges that they were here illegally. The FBI is not interviewing them because their visas have expired. They're interviewing them because they believe at least some of them know something or know someone who knows something about this case. And today, Mindy Tucker at the Justice Department clearly indicated you're going to see a lot more of these arrest warrants coming out.
And in that sense, going back to something Eileen was talking about, does the investigation seem to be broader than maybe we all first thought at the beginning? That is to say, more citizens of more countries around the world, both the investigation here and abroad.
No, as early as Wednesday, my sources in the intelligence community here and abroad were telling me of an intensive effort to go back over all of these past cases, and that the focus was on various terrorist groups, especially in North Africa, and especially Algerians and Egyptians. One particular group would be Al-Jihad or Islamic Jihad. The leader of that is one of the top lieutenants of bin Laden. They're really looking closely at that. Eileen mentioned the 1983 Marine barracks bombing. One person they're looking at to see if he might have a connection to this is Imad Mughniyeh, who before this terrible terrorist act at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Center had killed more Americans than any other terrorist, but nobody knows his name. No one's seen him in 21 years. So they're broadening it out, and I am told that so many skills were required, so many people were needed, the expertise so great that it had to be an amalgamation of groups operating under the Al-Qaeda umbrella.
You know, Mike, thanks. Mike Boettcher in Atlanta. We'll probably never know the answer to how this first began, who first had the idea, but we're going back 20 plus years. That's something. The president today called it a war. About this time last night when we talked to you, we did not tell you where the president was spending the weekend for security reasons. We said he was out of the White House. We can tell you that he's at Camp David, and that's where he held meetings today, and that's where he briefly talked with reporters. And White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now to talk more about the president's pointed words and warnings and the rest. Major, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Aaron. You mentioned when you were talking to Eileen that the pictures, or the pieces of the puzzle, rather, describe or create an image of one person, Osama bin Laden. Well, President Bush went a little bit further than that today, identifying Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect behind the terrorist attacks on Tuesday. Senior administration officials hastened to add, however, that he is not the only suspect the United States is looking at, nor would be the only one to feel the United States' wrath if, in fact, it is confirmed they are also involved in Tuesday's terrorist activities. Full day of national security meetings for the president at that presidential retreat at Camp David. Who exactly is in the president's National Security Council? Who was he talking to today? Well, the CIA director, his chief of staff, Andy Card, Secretary of State Colin Powell, his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, Vice President Cheney, also the Attorney General was there. And before that meeting, the president talked to reporters, and he said that the United States will spare no effort in searching out and finding those responsible for the atrocities on Tuesday.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that. As we plan, as we put our strategy into action, we will let you know when we think it's appropriate, not only for to protect the lives of our servicemen and women, but to make sure our coalition has had proper time to be noticed as well. But we're going to act.
We're going to act, and the president believes he will be acting whenever the United States act with the full support of a broadening coalition. The White House received more encouraging information about exactly how broad that coalition might in fact become. The government of Pakistan, through the President Pervez Musharraf, told the United States that they will fully cooperate, providing airspace and other vital assets, rather, to the United States government should, in fact, some action be taken against Pakistan's neighbor, Afghanistan, of course, home ground for Osama bin Laden. Also, Chief Representative of the Arab League told the United States government that it would be fully cooperative with the United States, providing it received proper consultation ahead of time about the actions to come. As all this was happening, the president tried to lay the rhetorical groundwork and prepare the American public for the very difficult times ahead. And in his radio address, he said the campaign against terrorism worldwide would in fact be a long one, and some sacrifice would be expected of everyone.
I will not settle for a token act. Our response must be sweeping, sustained, and effective. We have much to do and much to ask of the American people. You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short. You will be asked for resolve, for the conflict will not be easy. You will be asked for your strength, because the course to victory may be long.
All of this part of the president's effort to prepare the country for the difficult days ahead. And Aaron, if I could, I'd like to take everyone in our audience back to the very earliest moments of this catastrophe. Tuesday morning, Sarasota, Florida. I was traveling with the president, as were many other reporters. And we have some videotape I'd like to show you, because this moment will be recorded, as will so many others, in the history books. It's when Andrew Card, the White House Chief of Staff, whispers something to the president, and you see his expression change, become grave, become very beclouded with a sense of emotion. I'm going to tell you right now exactly what Andy Card said to the president when he leaned over. Now, you must understand, at this time, the president is already aware that one jet airliner has crashed into one tower of the World Trade Center. Andy Card said, a second plane hit the other tower, and America's under attack. We learned that only yesterday when Andy Card, the White House Chief of Staff, told that to pool reporters traveling with the president to New York City. Andy Card described it as a surreal moment. Absolutely. Aaron?
Well, that's some picture to look at. What you can't know, I suppose, is what was, well, not I suppose, what you can't know is what was going on in the president's mind at that point. Here's a guy who was a major, here's a guy who was 8 months or so into his term, and all of a sudden, sitting in a schoolroom in Florida, confronted with an extraordinary piece of information and an extraordinary challenge. And surely he knew in that moment that his administration, his presidency, that he himself were forever changed.
Changed forever, the world possibly changed forever. And it's worth pointing out this, Aaron, I think. At that moment, this president found himself in a position no other U.S. president had ever found himself, understanding that an act of war had been committed against American civilians. We can think about the grave moments many other U.S. presidents have had to deal with. President Lincoln receiving the horrific dispatches from Fredericksburg, Shiloh, Gettysburg. Perhaps FDR learning of the death toll at D-Day. Harry Truman learning of the death toll in Korea as the Army had to move backward almost to the southern end of the peninsula against the Chinese. Lyndon Johnson going through the daily death count in Vietnam. All of those presidents coping with the real tragedy of American service personnel dying. But at that moment, this president knew he was dealing with civilians who had been attacked and had at that time had no conception of how grave, how serious, how numerous the casualties would be. But he became a very unique American president at that moment.
He did indeed. One quick policy matter. The president talked about the coalition. You mentioned the coalition. Is there in fact a coalition? And by that I mean not just people saying we're going to help, but the kind of coalition that we saw in the Persian Gulf War, where there were clear commitments. People were making resource commitments that you could actually see, not just words, but things you could actually see.
Well, that is exactly the effort that the administration is going through now. Senior administration officials describe it as a you are either for us or you are against us moment for all of the world. And roll will be called only once, we have been told, and you will either be with us or against us. And when, for example, in the case of Pakistan, there have been times before where there had been these sort of airy words of support, but nothing definitive. Pakistani airspace is definitive, very much so. You'll recall that in 1998 when President Clinton had to fire cruise missiles into Afghanistan, the United States was denied Pakistani airspace and also denied Pakistani human intelligence, which might have been very valuable in pinning down the precise location of Osama bin Laden. Both things have now been offered up to the United States, as well as efforts throughout Pakistan to control the border with Afghanistan. Tangible assets now provided to the United States government. Is it a real coalition? Does it have all the definitive qualities the United States now wants and now expects to have? Not quite yet, but the administration is clearly moving in that direction. Aaron?
Major thanks. Major Garrett at the White House today. A lot of interesting stuff there. Nicely done. Thank you. Let's go to Atlanta. Former General Wesley Clark joins us, as he has each night and throughout the day, in fact, to help us deal with the military questions that are just, it seems to me, forming. I've got a bunch of them today, General Clark. Welcome again. Here we go.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay.
The President and the White House today pointedly, clearly, unmistakably did not rule out the possibility of ground forces. I guess we have to define the battle first, don't we?
Well, I think it's important to keep all the options on the table. We've been through this before, and we know that the smart move is keep all the options on the table. The big hammer is American complete commitment of ground forces with all their support. That's the big hammer. Hopefully we won't need it.
Where exactly, I don't mean to laugh about this, it's part of what is difficult here is, all right, let's start ratcheting up the military option. Who do we bomb? Where do we invade? Who do we go after? How do we do it? Where do we start? Where do we start?
Well, first we have to start with the appreciation that this is a different kind of war, as we've been discussing. It's a diplomatic strategy first. It's undergirded by sharing of information, actions by police, efforts to break up these terrorist cells, go after the headquarters. It's directed against individuals. It's not directed against facilities like airfields and so forth. But we also have to recognize that this terrorist network does have support from states. And if we were able to break it up without any use of military forces at all through effective police action in states all over the world, that's the right course of action. If we can't do that, and if there is state support, it may take more coercive means to go after them, and that may require the use of military forces. And that's how we followed down the path of military forces. But again, I think it's so important, Aaron, to underscore this may have been the second Pearl Harbor that happened on Tuesday, but I don't think you're going to see a repeat of the Second World War here.
And the reason you don't is just the nature of the battle
exactly.
is wholly different.
Entirely different. You're dealing against a network that's been embedded in dozens of countries around the world, including our own. It's a covert network, and it's individuals, and we got to take out the individuals.
But from the very beginning here, General, the President, the clear position of the government of the United States and the clear wishes of a good many commentators and former military and intelligence people like yourself has been, it's not enough to go after simply the bad guys. You have to go after the bad countries that have allowed the bad guys to live, to flourish, to be financed, and the rest. So it's not simply this kind of surgical thing, is it?
Well, it is, in principle, this kind of surgical thing. But we also recognize their state support. Now, those states have a choice. They can renounce it, and they can go after those terrorists as we're asking them to today, or they can become part of the problem. We'd like them to be cooperative. We're not declaring war on states. We're declaring war on a terrorist network and the states that are going to harbor them. So if those states want to renounce it, they better renounce it now, and they better cooperate. They can become the targets of this operation.
Let me ask you one other thing along this line that actually someone emailed me a question. Let me pass it along. And maybe the math's behind you, and I don't know if you have the telestrator device with you or not. But they said if it came down to Afghanistan, there's been a lot of focus on Afghanistan, that Afghanistan is a particularly difficult country to deal with militarily. Lots of countries have tried over the last several thousand years. None have been successful. Yeah. Can you explain why it's a problem?
Well, it's a problem because of geography and culture and distance. It's a long way from any of our sources of power. Let's look at the map. And we'll see that Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It's several hundred miles from the sea and the closest approach. It's got mountains over 7,000 meters, over 20,000 feet high in one corner. It's got a very difficult topography. It's peopled by various tribal groups. It's had a centuries-long tradition of defying invasion and fighting against invaders. It defeated the British twice in the 19th century. It turned back the Russian invasion in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And so it resists foreign encroachments, and it's just a terribly difficult piece of ground and difficult people. But that's not the objective. The objective is international terrorists. Afghanistan is of interest only because we know that the Taliban government in Afghanistan has, to one degree or another, provided support and cover and deniability for Osama bin Laden's network of training camps and perhaps his operational headquarters.
Well, that's not a small matter, though.
It's a very large matter.
Right.
It's a very large matter, but we'd still like to get the terrorist network first. Remember that this is a group that plans operations, and there's probably other operations in plan against us today that we don't know about. The work we're doing to roll up these cells, the pursuit of this activity that occurred against us and the terrorists that we've identified so far in the United States is vital. But we don't know that there aren't other sleeper cells associated with other prospective actions. And so it's vital to take our homeland defense responsibilities very, very seriously. So we don't want to get distracted from that by a months-long foray into very, very difficult terrain. We got to do everything, keep a lot of different balls in the air at once on this operation.
General Clark, I can feel you pushing me away from this line of questioning. As a former enlisted guy, I got to tell you, I'm enjoying a bit pushing a general back a little bit. Yeah. One more question then on this line.
Let me tell you why I want to push a little, if I could, Aaron, on this. Because it's a natural thing. America's angry, and people want to strike back at this in the sense of visible, forceful action right away. But we have to depend on our leadership to tell us whether that's the right thing to do and whether it's the wise thing to do. And what we don't want to do is we don't want a public outcry and building expectations that there's some easy, simple military solution that a few cruise missiles or a big 6-month buildup is going to resolve, because this is a much different type of problem. So that's why I'm pushing back a little bit to try to get the full dimensions of the problem in play. And there may well be a place for military action, but it's not the primary thing we're interested in right now.
General, I learned 30 years ago the guy with the scrambled eggs is always right. I'll stop here while I haven't been court-martialed. And I know I'll have other opportunities to try this again. Thank you. It's good to talk to you. Wes Clark, former NATO commander, joins us tonight. You know, you can't resist sometimes those 30 years. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. A couple of things from Jamie tonight. We saw some it's devastating, I think it's a fair word, pictures of the Pentagon, a look at the Pentagon we hadn't seen before, and he could tell us more about that, and we'll talk about some of the call-ups too. Jamie, it's been a long day for you as well. Good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. What would you like to start with?
Let's start with the pictures.
Well, first of all, the Pentagon released a couple of new pictures of the Pentagon today. First of all, they released some new video that was shot on the day that the attack took place, showing the devastation outside as the facade of the Pentagon collapsed. Now, this happened somewhere about 45 minutes after the plane hit, and what personnel told us here today was the amazing thing was that the building held as long as it did, and they credit that to reinforced steel that had been put in as part of the renovation campaign. They say that gave some of the people in that section enough time to get out and save themselves before the building actually collapsed. So they credit some of the procedures and some of the new building techniques they used in the renovation as saving some lives there. The Pentagon also released some video today inside showing the devastation and the damage in there, and that was quite remarkable as well. You could see the desks where people had been doing their work in that wing of the Pentagon. No clue that a fully loaded, fully fueled jetliner was about to crash into them. You could In this part of the Pentagon, you could still smell some of the jet fuel even days after the fire took place. And it's remarkable to look at some of the windows that were there that had special blast-resistant glass that were able to also mitigate the effects of the explosion. The death toll now stands at 124. It's been lowered twice because it turned out that 2 people who were counted were actually on some of the airliners that were hijacked, DOD employees who were actually on the planes. But they say the death toll would have been much higher had it not been for some of those security precautions.
Jamie, hold the thought for a second, okay? I want to come back to you. Don't leave us, and we'll come back to you and to the pictures. We've just picked up a couple of pieces of information we want to get to you as quickly as we can. Number one, we talked about a material witness the government was looking for right at the top of the program. We've now learned that this would be the second material witness to be taken into custody, has in fact been taken into custody here in New York. And we are also told that the FBI and police agencies are searching now an apartment in Jersey City just across the river and questioning 2 other people. That's going on now, or at least was going on a few moments ago. So this sense of an investigation in motion and making progress, whether you see it as quick progress or creeping progress nevertheless continues here on Saturday night. Jamie, it is difficult, I know, to be interrupted in mid-thought and mid-picture. I apologize, but here we go again.
Well, let me just mention a couple of other things. The Pentagon did say today that they were going to rebuild this section of the Pentagon as quickly as possible, although they say it'll take a couple of years and cost well over $100 million, probably hundreds of millions of dollars by the time they get through. And it's important for the Pentagon officials say for one reason to show that the Pentagon, which is the symbol of the arsenal of democracy, is going to be put back together. Also, another little important part of symbolism tonight from the Pentagon, we learned tonight that the operation that includes the combat planes flying over the United States, ships at sea along the coastlines, and the U.S. military support for the disaster relief both in New York and Washington has now been given the name Operation Noble Eagle. At this point, that just refers to what the military is doing now in response to the attacks. It doesn't extend to any offensive operation. When that time comes, it may get another name, or this name may be broadened. But again, the Pentagon puts a lot of thought into picking these names to try to communicate what it is they're trying to accomplish. And in this case, with a mission of homeland defense and aid to the homeland, they picked the name Operation Noble Eagle.
And on the reservist question, are the notifications going out? Are men and women getting phone calls or messages, however they do this, that it's time to report?
They are getting notifications as they're beginning to just start to identify units. Most of the notifications have not gone out as they're trying to figure out which units are the most appropriate and whether there are people, units that want to volunteer, or people within those units that want to volunteer. Already, though, some Coast Guard people have been activated in order to increase patrols along the coastline, and some reservists are beginning to get those activations. But the Pentagon stresses that at this point, all of those reservists being called to active duty are to support these 2 missions, either homeland defense or support the civil authorities. There's been no call-up of reservists yet for any offensive military operations.
Jamie, thanks. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon for us. Giving us a very good look at a very bad scene that went on there on Tuesday. On the subject of a very good look, I'll give you a very good look at the city of New York as it was. We just went to the files today and took some pictures of New York as it was the other day. That would be Monday or so. I'm not sure when these pictures were taken, but that's certainly how the city looked. Those 2 buildings, of course, are those 2 buildings in the center of the Trade Center, the towers of the World Trade Center. As you peer around, it's coming around New York Harbor, and there are the centers, 50,000 people, as you know by now, about where one of those planes hit, right about there as you zoom into the offices, the Statue of Liberty. I stand on this roof a lot when I come to work, and I look out there, and I don't know that I ever really saw the Statue of Liberty, and now I come up here every day, and it's almost the first thing I see when I look out in the harbor during the day. It's a little hard to see at night. Now, today, as we come in, just this watch, the towers are gone. And the smoke is there, and it is still there tonight, and apparently will be there for some time to come. The landscape of the city, in many ways, literally changed. The Trade Center buildings are in the district of Jerrold Nadler. Congressman Nadler is with us to talk a little bit. It's nice to see you. Look out there for a second. What do you see when you look at it? I don't mean literally, I suppose, what do you see, but what do you see?
It's unspeakable. It's unspeakable. I came up here from Washington on Tuesday and came up here by train, and normally the first thing you can see of New York, 20 miles away, is the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, and instead all you saw was a void and a huge column of smoke coming up from where it should have been and going out across the Jersey Shore to the south. And it was a gut-wrenching thing. I just felt violated. Yeah. My city was violated.
And that feeling, I suspect, hasn't changed much over the days. It shifts a little bit, but...
Has not changed. It's still terrible to look at pictures of the way New York looked and the way it looks now. It's a grievous, grievous wound.
You were down there yesterday with the president. I saw you. When you saw it, worse than you imagined, bigger than you imagined?
Well, I had been there on Wednesday also with the mayor extensively. I can't say it's bigger or smaller. It's just awesome to look at. It's just awesome to look at the site, to look at a mound that's maybe 40 feet high and was a 55-story building, the 7 World Trade Center, to look at the wreckage, at the bridges across West Street that led to the World Financial Center. One of them is completely down. The other's pretty intact but hanging attached to nothing. And looking at those 2 voids where those 2 towers were, and thinking of all the people who lie buried in that mound of rubble. It's awesome.
Just a couple of sort of odds and end questions. I'm not sure where all this goes. The mayor. You and the mayor are of different parties. You haven't always seen eye to eye. How do you think he's done?
He's done magnificently. I was with him much of the day on Wednesday. I sat in on the operations meeting. He called it a briefing, but it was really an operations and planning meeting where it was the mayor and his commissioners, the governor was there, and a couple of people. And I think I was the only person there just watching. And I was awed by the professionalism and the very matter-of-fact way he made the decisions. And I hate to say it, but this is his forte. Crisis is his forte. He's a very good crisis person, and he's done great in holding the city together and in voicing.
Yeah, it's really both elements of that, isn't it? It is literal crisis management, but the guy has been everywhere. He's been accessible. He's been smart in a lot of ways.
There's no question about that.
I mean, whatever your politics, it's really
forget
not
the politics.
issue.
It's irrelevant. He's been fine. More than fine. He's been very, very good at this.
It seems to me that politicians and perhaps journalists too, in times like this, say the expected things. And we've heard the expected things a lot. The city will rebuild, we'll be fine, we'll hang together, all of that. We're a country, I think, of short memories. Do you worry that the nation's attention at some point, not too far away, will turn to something else? There'll be another crisis, another moment.
Well, life goes on, and yes, things do change and people go on. But we will rebuild and so forth. But the fact is, we'll rebuild minus the somewhere between 4,000 and 20,000 people who are dead, and those families and their loved ones are shattered. I know some of those families myself, and they're not going to rebuild. I mean, the children will grow up and have children of their own, but there'll be a void. There'll be a terrible, terrible void, and there's no getting around that, obviously. And we have been awakened. I mean, when I saw that, I was in Washington. And I was about to go to my office at 5 to 9 in the morning when I turned on the TV, saw the World Trade Center burning, heard about a plane, thought immediately of the 1945 collision of an Army bomber into the Empire State Building. And then as I was watching, the second plane came in and hit the second tower, and I said, oh my God, it's a terrorist attack. Yeah. And then I immediately thought, thank God these people didn't have access to nuclear materials. Because that's the next problem that we're going to have, and that's a problem that we're ignoring right now. I mean, there's an article on the front page of the New York Times a few weeks ago that because of the expense the United States was going to abandon a program of, in effect, paying the Russians to give us Soviet weapons-grade plutonium to transform into material non-usable for bombs, so that it doesn't get smuggled onto a black market, so the Iranians or Bin Laden or some other lunatics get a hold of it. And how can we even think of abandoning such programs? I mean, if these people, 5 years from now, similar people had access to a nuclear weapon, do you know what this would be like?
One other thing. I'm old enough to remember this, so you must be old enough to remember this too. We're about the same age. I think you're a little younger, in fact. A headline in the paper at a very different time, but the city was in a very difficult situation. Ford to New York dropped dead, I think was the headline.
I remember the headline.
The city
very well.
was on the verge of bankruptcy. And the reason I remember it now is that the government, the federal government, has not always been very kind to the city of New York. Do you think the city is going to get what it needs? All that it needs?
I think the city is going to get all that the federal government can do to help it.
Okay.
I do think that. I think President Bush was very good. I participated in the negotiations over the last few days toward changing what was an original proposal by the president for $20 billion, most of which would have gone to the military, some to help rebuild here. And it changed into a $40 billion bill, doubled, with $20 billion earmarked really for reconstruction and for help and for victims. And there was a resistance to that in some quarters in Congress. The president, when asked for $20 billion for New York, immediately said yes. Senators Graham and Nichols tried to turn that around and stop that Thursday night. And I was asked on a radio show today why I thought that some senators wanted to deny New York the help. And all I could say was that Senator Graham did his country the best service he could render it by announcing his retirement.
Congressman, it's nice to talk to you. You leave with a zinger.
Well, thank you. But why indeed would people want to say to a stricken part of the United States that we don't want to give you this help? I don't understand that. But thank God the President of the United States and the vast bulk of people in Congress did not feel that way.
Thanks. It's good to talk to you.
Likewise.
I hope we'll talk again and we'll talk about where this money is coming from and the implications of it all. Thank you. Sit tight for just a moment if you don't mind. Let's go down to Gary Tuchman. Gary, if you've been with us over the last week, many of you have, you know, has been very close to Ground Zero through much of the time. He's still down there tonight. Gary, the activity there this evening.
Well, Aaron, even 4.5 days later, the horror of the scene is still overwhelming. Small fires continue to burn, smelly, acrid smoke continues to billow in the air, and more than 4,900 people are still missing. If you had to put an adjective to the scene up close, a word that would come to mind is hell-like. News media cameras haven't been allowed close to the scene. To Ground Zero for the most part. The police are keeping us away. So we've relied on video from civilians, video from emergency workers, and also video from the U.S. Coast Guard. And one thing you see close up today and tonight are great masses of twisted steel still dominating the landscape. With fires burning in different places, they remove some steel, it provides oxygen, and a fire starts in a new location. It looks like a terrible scene on a fictional planet. There is so much debris there. 22,000 tons have now been removed, according to the mayor of New York. That's 44 million pounds. But it's estimated that there are 600,000 tons there total. So that comes out to a total of 3% that's been removed, and that may even be a generous number. The most important goal right now, this story certainly has lots of ramifications and lots of tentacles, but the most important story right now is trying to recover survivors. The bad news, over the last 3 days, not one survivor has been found, but authorities are saying, and they're not just saying this to make people feel good, they still feel there is potential for people to be alive under the rubble. The World Trade Center had underground space of about 60 or 70 feet below the level of the ground, and they're saying it's possible, but they haven't been able to get to it yet. The fact is 4,972, that is the number of people who are still missing. 159 people are confirmed dead. So this death toll can eventually go to 5,100. You're looking at video of people who are very grateful for the emergency workers who have been on this scene. Right outside the perimeter where we're standing right now, where the public is not allowed, people have gathered to thank emergency workers, to hold signs, to clap for them. It isn't like an organized thing. It's not like people said, come on out at 6 p.m. and thank the people. People have just shown up, and we've seen hundreds of people at these checkpoints thanking the emergency workers. We've also seen people putting up murals throughout the city, thanking workers, putting up murals of American flags. And I've seen more flags in New York City today than perhaps I've seen since the nation's bicentennial in 1976. One other thing I want to tell you about 15 minutes ago, a fireman came up to me. He was back there at the scene, and he found in the rubble, among many other things, a small paperweight. And on the paperweight was the character from the funny pages, Ziggy. And on top of Ziggy, the paperweight said, quote, "Don't worry about tomorrow, just try to get through today." The fireman was struck by that tragic irony, as are we. Aaron, back to you.
I think a lot of people think that way. Gary, a couple of quick things perhaps. Is there the missing number, this dreadful 47 plus number? It hasn't changed a lot over a couple of days, leads me to believe at least we're close to a final number of missing. Is that what you're hearing?
There was some fear initially, Aaron, that we could have a death toll close to 10,000 here. That will not be happening. It is felt that it will be fairly close to a 5,000 number, to be frank about it.
It's almost obscene to think that that makes you feel better somehow. I remember hearing, I think Tuesday night or Wednesday, that the number might go to 20,000, but it now does look like it's going to be in around 5,000, somewhere like that.
You know, it's incredible, Aaron, covering Oklahoma City, 168 people died, a huge number of people. And now here we're talking about a tragedy where you are talking about more than 5,000 people dead. These are incomprehensible numbers. It's just hard to figure.
It is absolutely impossible to get your arms around. Thank you, Gary, for your work tonight. There was, it seems to us at least, a rather significant shift today over at the Armory. The Armory, as I think many of you may know, has been the place where families of the missing have gathered, seeking information about their loved ones. They've been coming there for several days now. Today, what went on there was one of those painful signs that it's been a while and the clock is ticking and hope is running out. Our Michael Oku is there and joins us now with more on that. Michael?
Aaron, I have to tell you, just walking through the city today, there is a tired, weary feeling throughout this entire city. And many people here have felt that they have already shed so many tears. I think over the next coming days, you will undoubtedly start hearing the words and phrases that are so often used at times like this that they have a ring of cliche to them. Return to normalcy, resolution, moving on. And yet there are so many people, possibly tens of thousands of people, connected to close to 5,000 lives that may have been lost that night, whose lives will never be normal again, who may never find resolution. What's happening here is that many of these people, the friends and family of those people who are missing from the World Trade Center attack, come to the Armory here on Lexington Avenue and 26th Street. And as of yesterday, about 3,100 people had walked through those doors, filed through those doors, filled out essentially a seven-page papers that essentially asked for any kind of identifiable information of those people who were missing. Everything from their name, of course, to their hair type, to their blood type, to anything recognizable, to what kind of nail polish they wear. And today, the New York City Health Department announced that a company called LabCorp, they are a Vermont-based company, a very large medical company with over 900 centers around the country, is going to be offering free DNA collections. That is, friends and relatives, specifically relatives, can provide identifiable materials that can be traced through their DNA to this company, and later authorities will ascertain through all kinds of testing the information that may ultimately connect these relatives and identify those people who are missing. They're asking them from everything from hairbrushes to toothbrushes to anything, any item that might have been used exclusively by that person who is missing. In fact, right now I am joined by Angela Ciccone, who is missing her godmother. Angela's godmother worked in the World Trade Center, I believe, what was it, Tower number
1?
Tower number 1 up on the 94th floor.
For Marsh McLennan, but it was a division of American Express. And so we're just looking for any information, if they saw her, she was leaving the building, if she was even in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. She's a very helpful person. We're sure she would have followed orders and helped someone, and we just need anything.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to give you that number very quickly. It's a number for LabCorp in Vermont. If you have any information that might be able to help them, if you have any information you want to get to LabCorp and give them DNA, get a DNA collection, they're at 888-933-3627. Back to you, Aaron.
No, not quite yet. Do the number again. I'm writing it down, and you said it faster than I can write it down.
Sure, let's do that again. 888-933-3627.
Thank you, Michael. Surprised me to have to write down a phone number. Thank you very much. It is just, you have to have something to match, do a DNA match, and that is why those rescue teams are being so meticulous there. They're looking for anything, it's a bit gruesome, but any identifiable body part remain that they could use in a DNA match, and that's why they're down there literally sometimes on their hands and knees. I'll show you something that's going on. I think it's going on right now. In fact, not too terribly far from here in Little Italy. This would have been the weekend of the Festival of San Gennaro, and it obviously is not a day for a festival in this city. It is a night for a vigil, and it is going on this evening in Little Italy. This is sometimes one of the more raucous late summer festivals in town. But like everything else, it's changed. Look at that face. Little Italy tonight. New York literally began to bury its dead today, and among them, 2 fire officials and 1 chaplain with the fire department. Reverend Michael Judge died early on Tuesday while administering last rites to another firefighter. He was carried from the tower seen by other firemen and died shortly thereafter. Richard Blystow covered his funeral today.
Surgery is going to keep news photographer David Handschuh away from some friends' funerals, but this one he wasn't going to miss. Because in the line of duty, he saw a lot of Father Mike Judge, the firefighter's chaplain, who was killed Tuesday while giving last rites to a fireman.
He would hold your hand and you would just feel good. He emanated some form of just positive goodwill that nobody else I've ever met could. By just touching you, by putting his hand on you and giving you a hug, you just floated away happy.
Many of those in the overflow crowd had narrow escapes that day. David Handschuh had 2.
You hear the sound and then the building starts falling down in slow motion. And I'm a photographer. The initial reaction was to raise the camera and take a picture, but something up here said, just run. And in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've never once run from anything. But it probably saved my life. The wall of debris that came flying down just picked me up and threw me a block.
One leg shattered, the other torn up. Firemen pulled him to a delicatessen. Another photographer captured that moment, but it wasn't over.
When the second building collapsed, the facade of that building was blown in. We were trapped once again. Using their hands and tools and sheer strength and will, they pushed their way out.
For news photographers, cameramen, reporters, days like that are part of an unwritten contract with life. So too with soldiers, policemen, firemen, which doesn't make it much easier. But the thousands still missing downtown, they didn't sign up for this.
I'm so sorry that so many people lost their lives over this. It's not comprehensible. It's not right.
At the end, the photographer pulled out his camera. It may not make much of a picture, but this one's personal. Richard Blystone, CNN, New York.
Well, we like a good picture, that's the truth. And even though our business is moving pictures, we like a good still picture. So one of the things we did today is with the help of Associated Press, we put together some pictures, not just any